Welcome to Pirate Living Podcast. We are your hosts, Kristen and Karan. On this podcast, we are highlighting ordinary people living extraordinary lives. These are pirates who take small, bold actions daily to create social change. Pirate life is all about rebelling and breaking the rules for good. Creating lasting social change starts by first breaking our inner rules. After all, the hardest rules to break are your own. The pirates we highlight have dedicated themselves to creating good trouble.
Today, we're talking with Kortney Olson. Kortney is the CEO of Grrrl Clothing, best-selling author, and has been dubbed the world's deadliest legs by the Stan Lee. After surviving a rape, an eating disorder, depression, and drug and alcohol addiction all before she was 21, Kortney knows how important it is to turn trauma, pain, and despair into power, strength, and confidence. Kortney has been on a mission to empower women across the world, and she certainly has had a huge impact on my own life. Kortney is a real force to be reckoned with and a true pirate queen. So, Kortney, we are so excited to be talking with you today.
Thanks for having me.
So, well, first of all, starting off here with this book that you wrote, your memoir, Crushing It, How I Smashed the Diet Culture, Addiction, and the Patriarchy. What I'd like for you to tell us is summarize these, 400 and something pages, and just share with us.
Book review, please.
Yeah. Well, just share with us a bit of your journey and how you got to where you are today.
That's a great question. And I know that thing is daunting. It's so big. Mm-hmm. You know, I started writing it 10 years ago, not knowing that my story was kind of really just getting started. But, you know, it's probably definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than getting off speed, Oxycontin, alcohol, all combined. Don't recommend people write books. Really passionate about it. But yeah, the book is basically just that. It's a memoir, and it's split into 3 parts. You know, the first section is really highlighting the root of my body dysmorphia and the driving force behind, you know, why I felt the need to put substances in my body to change the way that I felt. And the second part is really about discovering the muscle fetish industry. And that was such a huge watershed for me because I'll just let you know, I don't have a lot of fancy words. So that's one of them, watershed.
Noted.
It had such a pivotal impact on me because, you know, growing up, I wanted to look like Kate Moss. And I had no idea that there was this whole world out there of men who admire and appreciate, to say the least, female muscle. And in fact, it's had such a big impact on me that I'm working on producing a docuseries right now around it. And then the last part is really about, you know, analyzing the world in which we live in and how this construct of the patriarchy comes into play, and gender roles and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So it's it's quite a read, but I think it's, you know, there's something in there for everybody. I've had a lot of guys read it and still be able to find stuff to relate to, even though it's primarily an addiction memoir. Mm-hmm. There's still a lot to analyze. And, you know, then the end of each chapter, there's a section called Do the Work. Well, do the effing work, if you will. Because, you know, it's just so easy to not do that stuff. And until you put pen to paper, you know, you don't really make a lot of those aha connections and work through your trash. We just kind of mull it around in our head, and that doesn't get us very far. So it's a little bit of an interactive book. And it, you know, again, like I said, growing up, I was desperate to look like Kate Moss, and had no idea what alcoholism was, and grew up with an alcoholic mother. So taking in all those behaviors and not realizing that it is learned behavior as well as hereditary. And so there's a big emphasis on that as well, and helping educate people around what that is, you know, because had I known that my mom wasn't a bad person that needed to get good, and that she was a sick person that needed to get well, I think my life would have turned out much differently, you know? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's, I mean, I could, did you want me to walk you through the story? Or I don't know how much time we have. I don't want to be here till Christmas. So
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, if anyone wants to know the full story, buy the damn book and read it.
There you
Because
go.
it is a great book, and I did appreciate the fact that at the end of each chapter, I mean, one of the things that we do as coaches, Kristen and I, is a lot of story work, and like you said, putting pen to paper is the crux of like our coaching practice, right? So the fact that you have that in there to help guide people with doing the work is super helpful, right?
Awesome.
And an extra bonus that you don't usually get in a book. I mean, I would like to start personally with the stuff that you do with Grrrl Clothing and everything that has had the most impact on me. And I'm wondering, like, where did this like obsession with trying to look like Kate Moss come from for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I forget how old you are, but I'm 40. And so growing
Older
up,
than you.
are you really?
I am, yeah.
No kidding. Okay, then.
Yeah,
Yes, that's good. You got a podcast sharing your secrets with the people, because
absolutely.
I thought you were 30 or something. But anyway,
I'll take it.
so oh yeah, that's right, because you've going through the pause yourself or all that stuff. So
Absolutely.
that makes sense. Yeah, in the 90s, she was the thing. And I remember, as I talk about in the book, seeing her for the first time in a magazine when my mom was tanning. And I was stuck sitting in that room with her, thumbing through that and seeing that image of her looking like a goddamn flamingo, standing on one leg with her other leg. She was basically in the tree pose, more or less. And her collarbones were sticking out. She was just so thin. And that had such a huge impact on me as a young person, thinking that was the definition of beauty. And it just was emblazoned in my brain that was what was desirable. And, the 90s in general, it was all about that heroin chick look and all the rest of it. And not realizing how much that stuff plays into our subconscious as young people. And what's terrifying today is obviously how many young kids are on social media. And, previously we didn't have to deal with that as young people. We just had magazines and billboards and whatever other small number of avenues there were to consume media. And now, they have goddamn 12-step programs for people that are addicted to technology. So it's like a drug addiction wrapped into one big bullshit burrito. So these kids are literally consuming this stuff 24/7, and it's really terrifying. Right. So, and just the level of assholery that comes with, even just being in stories on Instagram, Snapchat is a lot worse. But, there are so many filters that are easy to access that just make you look impeccable, like not even of this planet. Right. And that is subconsciously getting burned into their brain every single day, day in and day out, hour after hour, as to what they should look like. So when they go and look in the mirror, it's like, oh my God, I'm disgusting. I'm old. So it's really quite unfortunate. And it almost feels like it's too big to tackle now, It's like, well, just bring the asteroid on, really. I mean, I don't know what's left. So that's really where this drive came from, was to start a different narrative. And it's challenging because I'm into bodybuilding, right? I like to look like a science project. I like to look like an action figure, and not posting a ton of photos of your progress or celebrating your accomplishments, or it's hard because whether they're before and afters or progress photos, they're still toxic, because we're still putting emphasis on what we look like, as to, opposed to our characteristics and our nature and, our morals and values. And so I find it a really slippery slope. I really do. And I think there's a lot of slippery slopes out there today, and a lot in which we can't really discuss freely because there's so much, canceling going on, and people just aren't open to having productive conversations anymore. It's just more about being right and starting fights. And it's like this theme of division is really just running rampant. So it's good to be able to have platforms like this to discuss this stuff. But yeah, to give you a really long, drawn out answer to your short question, it was definitely just being influenced as a young person to think that that's what was desirable and beautiful.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So two things to go with that. Like, first of all, as a coach, I often struggle because I want to like celebrate any of my clients' successes, but I'm also very aware of like, I don't put the before and after or whatever pictures, even the progress pictures of my clients, because that's not what I'm about as a coach. Like that result is a side effect of the work, maybe a side effect of the work that they've put in to bettering their health, right? So it is one of those things that I think about a lot when my clients come to me and they want to celebrate like a weight loss. Whereas I'm more than happy to post when they come off of like medication with their health journey. I'm like, yes, let's share this, right?
Right.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because you did mention like learned behaviors. And a lot of the clients I talk to and work with, specifically in nutrition, they learn a lot of their behaviors with dieting and stuff from their mom. Is that something that you got from your mom as well?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. She was on a new diet every other week, and back then, pills, ephedra, all these things that were still legal. I remember, God, what was it? Thermomax in college. I don't know if y'all had that up there in Canada. I doubt it. But down here, ephedra was the bomb. You get up on that stuff and you're just ramped. And then, of course, you add in drinking, and it was just a recipe for disaster, because I should have been blacked out hours ago, but I'm still going because I got ephedra pumping through my body. So diet pills, diets. I remember by the time, I got to college, I was doing like the Atkins diet. And before I started the Atkins diet, and in fact, I had my dad's like original book from the 70s. It's like printed out, scrappy, gross PDF that he had for years. And so before that, though, it was like fat-free everything. I was eating like canned vegetables. Veg-All was the name of it. It was like carrots, potatoes, and green beans, I think, all diced up. And then I would have a white baked potato with barbecue sauce, right? So just chocked full of sugar. But all this stuff was fat-free. So in my eyes, I was killing the game.
I remember the Snackwell cookies.
It's fat-free.
Did you guys have the Snackwells?
Yep.
Yeah, fat-free cookies. What?
Yep.
Gotta eat them all.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It's tragic to think back and like, ponder like, God, how we had no education around that stuff, So it's terrifying again. But yeah, fat-free. And then of course the whole time I'm drinking, not realizing that's just empty calories. Just had not a clue. Atkins. And then what else did I start doing? Oh, cabbage soup diet. You name it, I did it. So yeah, definitely got that from my mom. Bless her heart.
So then in terms of like health and nutrition and exercise, how did that part of your life kind of turn around?
Great question. When I got to university, I found the gym, because prior to that, I, never really went to a gym. So when I started college, I was 17 for a short period of time, a couple months. And in high school, I played basketball, I was a cheerleader, I skied, I was somewhat athletic. And then of course, growing up, my dad had equipment out in the garage, and my brother's 8 years older than me. So, I'd always go out there and follow them around. So when my brother was 16, I was 8, and I just wanted to do everything that he did. So I, would go out there and tool around and stuff. So I, felt comfortable around weights, but I just never had any motivation to do that until I got to college. And then once I got in there, I knew how to do very little. So I taught myself some really bad form and did a bunch of stuff repeatedly, like the abductor and adductor machine. Hence, I didn't realize I was training for watermelon crushing well before I knew what, my future looked like. So that machine, and then I would do, tricep rope pull downs just incessantly. So that's why I always have like massive triceps. So I would go in there for 2-3 hours a day, and that just became my new thing. Because prior to that, I'd spent the year on methamphetamines trying to be skinny. So it just seemed like a logical transition to get into the gym. But of course I started drinking, and often I'd go in there still drunk or still hungover. I'd start running and I'd be throwing up. Excuse my yawning.
Okay.
We just came off the back of, as you know, Grrrl Live. And as soon as that event wrapped up the next day, I went and did a wrestling event in Chicago. And like I said, started filming for this docuseries. I haven't quite slowed down yet, or learn the art of that. But so yeah, that's when my gym so call it an addiction. Yeah, call it what it is. Started was right after getting off of methamphetamines and getting to university. So,
and to kind of like fast forward now, because you have a program that you have for fitness as well, right? You're getting
yeah. I've got Get Massive, Backbones, which is a back rehab program, Recomp, change your body composition, and then Body Fit, which is an at-home training program. So yeah, that's some stuff.
So where can people go and find that if they're interested?
Us on my website, so it's KortneyOlson.com.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Of course.
About that. Gotta sell it.
Okay. And so I know the answer because I read the book, but how did drug addiction get started for you?
Unfortunately, my stepsister, who was a year older than me, got into methamphetamines. I'd say it was probably her junior year of high school, my sophomore year of high school. And then when she was a senior and I was a junior, I did it with her like once. And I remember we went to a party, and the people were doing keg stands and all the rest of it. And I had like 3 red Solo cups, those plastic Dixie cups of beer. And I never at any point really felt drunk. It was really strange. I just was like super talkative and just wanted to talk to everybody. And then, getting home at like 3:00 in the morning and not being able to fall asleep. And then the come down, at like 7 a.m. I remember laying there in the bed being so depressed. And I was like, screw this. This is horrible. I don't ever want to do that again. And then, 6 months went by or so, and fast forward to my senior year, and it was Sadie Hawkins. And then of course, after I actually DJ'd our dance. And I come to find out Sadie Hawkins was supposed to be like a dance to empower women because they asked the boys to the dance. And, so it's just ironic that it was that dance where, it's meant to be this empowering experience. And then, I DJ'd the dance, and by the time I got everything packed up and back over to my friend's house, she was supposed to be having like a house party, and it was super quiet. And I walked in, I go in the back, and there was like a circle of my friends in the back corner. And I remember the porch light came on because it was one of those motion activated sensor ones, and it just boom, was shining straight into my friend's eyes. And all I could see were like just black saucers. And I was like, what is going on? And I kind of walked up a little closer because it was just this eerie feeling, you know, because they were once your methamphetamines make you really why am I blanking on this word? Paranoid, make you really paranoid. And you know, all of a sudden there's just this air of paranoia, and I'm looking around and I see the pipe, and I was like, uh-oh, what's going on here? And so that was kind of history, really. It was just like, oh, well, you know, you've done it before. You're not going to become homeless from doing it once. And so I did it again. And then from there, it was just guns blazing. I just fell in love with it, you know, because of course I didn't have an appetite, and I knew better and knew just to say no. But that is essentially what kicked it off. And there are people who can successfully just use that on the weekends and, you know, binge party or whatever. Not my experience. Not my experience. So I mean, I went balls to the walls right out the gates, and it just progressively got worse and worse and worse and worse. And I started hanging out with drug dealers and all the rest of it. So I did manage to get off of it for the couple of years I went off to college. But as soon as I got a DUI, because I just replaced alcohol with meth, you know, not knowing, as we say in Narcotics Anonymous, we say, you know, alcohol is a drug, period. Because it, you know, you get drunk and then you know, make poor decisions and you end up going back to your drug of choice most often than not. And yeah, so I ended up getting a DUI and moved back home to take a break because school was so hard as a drunk. And when as soon as I got back home to Humboldt County and back around like old associates and whatnot, it was on and cracking, you know. So I got back on it again, but this time it was crystal meth instead of just speed. And that's way more addictive. And then I started drinking at the same time. So, because previously when I started out doing it, I never wanted to drink. And the drug dealers would always try and get us to drink, you know, and turn into little loose whores or whatever. And I was like, you didn't want to mess up your high. And I was like, no, thank you, I'm good. But then, you know, you progress, and then it was crystal meth and drinking, because you had to drink in order to get yourself out of neutral. Because you get so high, you know, you could hardly formulate a sentence. Your brain is racing so fast. So then you need the alcohol to bring that back down a little bit. And it's always just, you know, uppers, downers, laughers, and screamers. So, yeah, and then that lasted for another, up until 2007. So that was, you know, basically on and off for 8 years. And then after, the last day I smoked methamphetamines was July 4th, 2007. It was 4th of July. And then I wound up with like 4 felonies hanging over my head. So I was like, oh dear, probably a good time to get clean and sober. Because I'd already been to rehab. I'd already been to the rooms of AA and NA. You know, I was familiar with what the disease was. I knew better. You know, I just kept trying to manage it, and it never worked out. You know, at this point I'd wrecked 5 Hondas, including 1 motorcycle, hence why I've got this stupid bump sticking out of my shoulder right there. And yeah, from there, I had like, I think I wanted to say I had about 90 days clean and sober. That seemed to be as far as I could ever make it, his 90 days. And then I hurt my back moving my brother, I think is what it was. And somebody gave me some pain pills. And as soon as I saw that curbed my appetite, and unlike most people, these narcotics actually made me feel more energetic and more up, even though they're a depressant. So then I started using them, you know, casually. And then of course I managed to do that for a short period of time before it was chewing up 6 to 8 at a time. And then after about 1.5 years of that, I graduated to Oxycontin. And which, you know, Oxy is just basically legal heroin. And I did that for about 6 months. And that, you know, spiraled out of control really quickly. And at the end, I was taking about 80 milligrams a day. which nets out, back then it was about $1 a milligram. So, I was having about an $80 a day pill habit, which is pretty freaking expensive.
And
Yeah.
So how did you finally like kick it? Like, what was that pivotal, that turning point for you that you're like, no more?
Yeah. I actually, and I don't think I wrote about this in the book. I honestly can't remember. It was just so much content in there. But I had, at the time, because I was still doing the muscle fetish stuff, and I had an older gentleman that was a client that I let go way too far. And that was purely because I was high. I had no wits about me. I had a really difficult time verbalizing my thoughts. And it just got to the point where I started like nodding off in the middle of choking guys out with my legs. It was, really not a good situation. So, that was more or less the event that was the catalyst to my spiritual rock bottom. Because so often we have like a health rock bottom or a financial rock bottom. We've wrecked a car, we've ran somebody over, what have you. Generally speaking, it's something catastrophic. But this time around, it was unlike having felonies hanging over my head or, wrecking cars. It was really a spiritual rock bottom. I was so empty, and I was making incredible money, right? Charging $400 an hour, traveling all around the world, being my own boss, doing something I was really good at, but it was not fulfilling my soul. And I really just felt like I was just waking up to make more money, to acquire more debt, to stress out about it. I had no stability. And I just thought, this is so empty and meaningless, and then also struggling so much with body dysmorphia and having all these guys be like, oh, muscle goddess, and, let me worship you, and, want to buy you gifts. And then as soon as they leave, you're just back in your head like, I'm a fat, disgusting piece of shit. It's just crazy. So I knew that there was a disconnect, because it's like, how are all these people seeing this and I cannot stay happy for 5 minutes? And I still struggle with it. I'm just turned 12 yesterday. I have 12 years clean and sober, and I'm like, do I need to be on antidepressants? Like, I am, it's just the state of the world today. Being an entrepreneur is incredibly difficult. I had $1 million investment on the line for 2 months. And this guy every day for, the last 2 months was like, oh, my team is 1 to 5 days out, banking on that. And meanwhile, I've hired people to fulfill these upper management roles and placing all these orders. And then now all of a sudden, all this funding falls through. And it's like, what's the point? Yeah. And so, it's always life. That's just life. But, once you're clean and sober, you tend to be able to have a little bit more perspective. So, yeah, that's, I forget what the original question was, but
Just
there's
the
a
turning
20-minute
point.
answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I did see, I mean, congratulations on 12 years clean and sober. Like, that's awesome. And like, super proud of you. As someone that has read your story and seen where you've come from, and also just like followed your journey since, I don't know, whenever the hell how old is Grrrl Clothing now?
6.5.
Yeah. So 6.5 years. So we kind of skipped over the whole muscle fetish thing, and I don't want to skip over that. So how did you get into that? And I mean, you kind of touched on it a little bit about how did that change your own like body image, like perspective. I mean, you talked about, that it didn't quite connect internally about, how amazing and beautiful you actually are. But how did you get into it, and how did that change your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was on Craigslist of all places, because I used to do a fair bit of nude modeling and like topless modeling and whatever. So I was the the internet sales manager for an auto group. And I hated my job. I absolutely hated it. And there's just this huge fear of being in debt, and at the time, I think my credit card debt was like $4,000. Now I'm like 400 grand. Okay, maybe whatever. It's not 400, but it's up there. But at the time in my mid 20s, that stressed me out so much. And I just felt like I was going to be trapped in this job with this really low ceiling, doing something I hated. And I was on Craigslist and I came across this ad that said muscular calf video shoot, ballerinas and athletes must apply. And it was like $100 an hour or something. And I was like, oh, what? That sounds amazing. It sounds like porn though. Let me go ahead and take a picture of my calf muscles. And so I did, sent it off, not having a clue, as to what would come of it. And then the next day, the guy was in my office and explaining to me that, there's this website where you make short video clips and sell them. And this whole world of guys that were, really into calf muscles. And I was like, what? So, all right, well, whatever. I don't care. Just pay me. So I went down there to Oakland, California, in the Bay Area. And sure enough, I did, this guy had me like reach up in his wife's closet and try and like get her purses down whilst he's filming my calf muscles. Mm-hmm. And then he put the camera on a tripod and was like instructing me on how to choke him out with my legs, AKA scissoring. I was like, all right, this is strange. And then his wife came home from the gym. I think she was training a client or something. And she was talking about, a session that she had later on that night and was going to get, it was a foot session. And this guy was paying her $300 to worship her feet. And I'm like, excuse me? Wait, whoa, back up. What do you mean? What do you mean? And sure enough, I just could not believe it. And that was my first introduction to sessions. And then I did a photo shoot, and then his friend came over who owns a website where women, are flexing and so forth. And we went out Jack London Square, and he was trying to, instruct me on, okay, front double bicep. And I'm like, a what? And he's like this. I'm like this, and I'm flexing. And so that was an experience. And he said, yeah, you'd be great on a webcam. And I was like, oh no, I can't do that. My boyfriend would get super pissed off. And he said, no, it's not like that. You just go on there and flex. Like the most risque thing you'd do is take your shirt off if you wanted to. And I said, well, I didn't wear a shirt till the 5th grade, so it doesn't sound that big of a deal. And so I started out on a webcam and got familiarized with this whole world, and then moved into, making custom videos, and then eventually and finally sessions. Mm-hmm. And it was just truly mind-blowing to me, to do all these different things. And at the time, my boyfriend was like, I don't want you doing anything that's, not athletic. So, because there's a lot of different categories within this world of strong women, right? So some guys are just purely into wrestling. And then some of them within the wrestling domain is, semi-competitive and competitive. Guys actually want to try and beat you. And then there is fantasy, guys that know that they wouldn't stand a chance, or they can't risk getting any kind of injuries or bruises on their face. And so they just want to be pinned down basically, and just kind of feel like they're being overpowered. And then sometimes they're somewhere in between, so anything from that to then there's like muscle worship, where guys are obsessed with your biceps or your calf muscles or your lats or your legs. And then there's things like scissoring, where they want to get choked out, and hence how I started crushing watermelons between my legs. Arm wrestling is another big one. They want to try and arm wrestle you. And then they break down into like smaller categories like humiliation. They want to get made fun of, like, oh, you got beat by a girl. Or there's like tickling fetish. There's belly punching. There's, guys who are into, like I said, feet or hairy armpits. It's just truly blew my mind, because literally it was a contradiction to everything that I had been programmed to believe what was considered desirable and beautiful for a woman to be. And, it really coincided with this whole concept of, women not being the weaker sex, and, embracing being strong. And it was just really, truly fascinating and mind blowing. So again, that was my original intent, was to write a book purely about that, because I wanted women to know, like, hey, when you leave your house, if you're upset because your boots won't go up over your giant calves and you think you're a fat heifer, well, I got news for you. There's a bunch of dudes out there who would sit and pay $400 an hour to worship your big heifer calf muscles, no sex. And that was the hardest part for me to wrap my head around, where I was like, how, supply and demand work, right? So I don't know. I might be shooting myself in the foot, because, when I produce this docuseries, I'm sure we're going to open up a whole new avenue of women and their desirability to get strong and jacked up. So, and then all of a sudden the market will be saturated. And everyone will have to drop their rates. But I'm fine with that. So yeah, super fascinating stuff.
The internet's an interesting place where you find so many people that will worship, or interesting things that you didn't think were interesting about yourself.
100%. Well, and the thing too is, and again, gender is not binary, but in my experience, I speak to men and women, because I know, there are people who are non-binary, of course, and so forth. But when talking about the masculine and feminine energy and the gender roles that come with those labels, it's that's where my experience therein lies. And so I've never had a woman book a session with me, and so I would always be like, what is it? Because I would like, why are men so weird? Because they're the whole gamut of whether they want to get like kicked in the balls repeatedly, or, like I said, humiliated. And you think like, oh, well, these must be like high powered CEOs or lawyers or whatever. And oftentimes, these are kids out of college, or computer programmers, or a car mechanic. Sure, you get your fair share of everything, lawyers, doctors, cops, doesn't matter. But I just started to really look into, how gender defines our experience, and just how bizarre it was, really. And seeing how these guys, I'm like, when did this start for you? What kind of sensory, like, is it just this, these visual creatures, whereas women were like, hey, let's just have a glass of wine, non-alcoholic, whatever, and have a chat and a cuddle, and guys are like, well, let me pretend to be a rug and please step on my face. Like, what is going on here? So
yeah, like what need is that fulfilling?
Exactly. And I still haven't figured that out. And that's in part, my quest in producing this docuseries, is to try and pull that back a bit and really figure out what is it, and how they work. And of course, then to let women know, whatever bullshit is keeping you in the house feeling sorry for yourself because you think you're too fat to whatever, and you're not good enough, and you're so depressed about it, you don't even want to leave. To say, look, the world is not what you think it is, not even close. And I would venture to say that 1 out of 5 guys falls into this camp, into this category of, being not normal, and not giving a single fuck about what we think is. They don't see cellulite. I mean, they might see it, but they don't have the same hatred for it that we do. So it's really fascinating.
So I know you've done a lot of work with young girls, with and read your book, but Camp Confidence, and that leading into like what you do with Grrrl Clothing. But where do you think this, like, do you think it's all coming from the media, or where do you think it is that us women are learning that we have to be perfect in order to be worthy?
That's a really good question. Everywhere,
Mhm.
society at large, so often we'll hear it from the most likely of people, teachers, they're just regurgitating things or reconfirming beliefs or saying stuff subconsciously that they're not even aware that is being toxic.
Mhm.
I can't give you an example. Well, maybe something like, oh, her dad's gonna need a shotgun when she gets older, or all these little tiny, small little micro things that
Better watch out, boys.
yeah,
Things
that's
like that.
exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So it comes from us and bombards us from every corner of society. You know, so but media obviously being the biggest one, advertising,
Mhm.
100%. So that's why it was, so important to create Grrrl and to start a conversation around it, because it's about building awareness, right? Because I always say if there's no awareness of a problem, then there's no problem to solve.
Mhm.
So first we got to get really clear on what the problem is. The problem is that we all think there's something wrong with us, and that we're not good enough. So yeah, I would definitely say it's for sure the advertising industry at large. Yeah.
And so how did Grrrl Clothing come about then?
It was started off the back. I created a program for teenage girls, as she said, Camp Confidence, that long story short, because it is a bit of a story, I had met my husband and I told him, I said, look, I want to be speaking to women. And, we kind of parked that thought, and I launched a brand called Confidence by Kortney and was going to make a YouTube channel and do all this stuff. And had I stuck with it, well, boy, of course I didn't, because everything wasn't good enough. The videos weren't good enough and I didn't have any focus. And he ended up getting a job as a CEO of a national rugby team. And I came on as the assistant strength training coach. And I still had all my old video content out on the web. And a journalist came across it. But prior to him coming across it, I decided, that I wanted to still work with teenage girls in some capacity, because that was always of interest to me. And I had applied with Big Brother, Big Sister, and as a volunteer. And then the very next day, this journalist published a story, and it was on the front page of the paper, saying, that I was a ex-fetish porn star and my husband had hired me to work with teenagers, and like what a disgrace. And really, I was the pictures that they took off my Facebook and the way they positioned everything in the headline, I mean, it just made me look like such a piece of trash. I mean, it was atrocious. And so I had all these mothers, bagging me out online. I don't want that slut training my son. And then I saw the power of syndication, and I watched this story syndicate across the world. So from the UK to India to New Zealand, and then of course in Australia, all the other papers, Sydney Morning Herald, 50 Shades of May, because that's my husband's last name. It was just ridiculous. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, how is this news? This is not news. Like, this is the dumbest shit I've ever seen in my life. And fortunately, I had just finished working the 12 steps, so I'd done a lot of work in recovery. I had just watched a documentary by Gene Kilborn called Killing Us Softly, which I highly, highly, highly recommend everybody watch. So I was acutely aware of how much the media likes to bag out women and put us in a position of being powerless, right? Because a year prior, a rugby player in New Zealand had actually married a proper porn star, and the whole country was high-fiving him. But yet I came along and it was like the most disgusting, foulest pile of shite known to man. and my husband was such a disrespectful, negligent person for bringing me on board. I mean, they just really put me through the mud. And, having watched this documentary, I could see how, all the men in the commercials in Australia were either barbecuing or changing a tire, drinking beer on Forex Island. And all the women were changing diapers, doing school pickup, cleaning toilets. And I was like, wow, this is really powerful. So I held my head pretty high and, you know, managed to stay sober for one, and keep my wits about myself. But then after about a month, because this went on for quite some time, big brother big sister called me and they said, hey, we got your application, we're really sorry we can't work with you because of what's going on in the media. And that's when it hit me, and that's when I had this whole breakdown, poor me, sobbing, crying. And shortly thereafter, though, I just had a God shot, if you will. And it was like all of a sudden the word no flashed across my face. And I was like, you know what? Screw that. I'm going to start my own program ran by people who've been there and done that and not just read it out of a textbook. And so I sat at my kitchen table for the next 9 months and put together a curriculum of all the stuff that I wish I'd been taught when I was in school, and essentially created the framework for Camp Confidence, which was teaching the 5 habits, lessons, and principles that lead to the development of self-love. And then after that is achieved, then of course we can focus on building a sisterhood. And it was at that point I wrote the pledge, the pledge, which is on all of our hang tags for Grrrl Clothing. And then, the idea was these girls would take the pledge, get this little silicone, turquoise bracelet. And then if they ever saw other girls from other camps out on the street, it was like a symbolic thing. They knew straight away that other girl was not their competition. And it actually happened a couple times because we had about 8 camps. We had 62 graduates go through the program. And these girls were actively cutting themselves, severe bullying issues, self-esteem issues. Some had drug addiction. And they had a remarkable 2-day experience where they got to, make 10 new best friends, learn about nutrition, fitness, self-defense, meditation, all these things, assertiveness, social media savvy skills, like just things that really should be taught in school. And it was incredible. And then in the downtime, one of my partners got pregnant, and my husband, who is a genius, said, why don't you take the same vision and mission and roll that into a clothing line? And instead of reaching 10 teenage girls in this tiny corner of Australia, you can now talk to women all around the world. Because what I was noticing is when these girls would go back home, there would be a disconnect, and then like an unwinding, if you will, of all the great stuff that they took away. And I was kind of like looking at it. I'm like, well, what's going on? It's like, oh, mom needs this message just as much as she does. Right. So, if not even more. So it was made sense to create this. And oddly enough, a year prior to coming up with the name, we had created a company called Like a Grrrl Clothing, GIRL, and it sat on a shelf for a year. But it was right before the feminine hygiene company Always had come out with a campaign called Like a Grrrl, and they were interviewing 5-6-year-old girls on what does it look like to run like a girl, and they're running and they're getting it. And then they ask teenagers and they're like flopping around, So that came out shortly after we had registered that company. So it was almost like, a sign from God being like, yeah, you must pursue this. And then again, we revisited it, went and met with the designer, and the designer was like, oh, it sounds really flowery. And so Dave was thinking like, well, how Kortney spells her name differently. How could we spell girl? And it just popped up into his head, girl. And he said, all right, that's it. And he was unfamiliar with, there's a Riot Grrrl from the 90s, which was big in America. He's from England. He had no recollection. He was unaware of that. So it was just ironic, if you will. And worked. You Google the definition of GRRL, and it's something about a borderline aggressive yet assertive, confident woman. It's like, yep. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how it got started. And that was 6.5 years ago.
And can you share some of like the ethos behind it? Like I love the fact that like the sizing, the way you do your sizing, and your advertising and things, like I think that is what, like, as someone that started whatever wearing girl clothing 6.5 years ago and still wears it every single day, is one of the things that like keeps me coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we our point of difference is we don't use sizes, and instead use athletes' names and body types, which of course allows women to find their true fit, because in Nike you could be a small, in Reebok you could be an extra large. It's just women's sizing is all over the shop. So this also allowed us to eschew global sizing, because we have distribution in Canada, the UK, Australia, and all their sizing is different as well. So but taking away the stigma around being a 3XL or a 2XL, and not needing to shop in the petite section or the plus size section. It's like, we're all just bodies. Like, let's take away the emphasis on what category we're supposed to fit into, So yeah, that was a big part of it. And then of course, not making a vow to not use Photoshop. Coco, one of our size athletes, she had really bad eczema on her legs. And I was just looking back through some of the photo shoots, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. Like, it's just, you can clearly see that what you see is what you get. There have been shoots where I've looked at the bottom of my feet and I'm like, oh, they're like covered in dirt. The bottom of my feet are essentially black. And I'm like, oh, wow.
Makes it better.
Yeah. So, because that stuff has such a huge impact on our subconscious when we see airbrushed images. It really just takes the humanity out of our experience. We're not supposed to look like fluffy, painted, polished rocks. It's not how it's meant to be.
Yeah.
So really trying to normalize what's normal. Yeah.
I also really appreciate with the sizing that being athletic does not equal being skinny.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That you can be you are still an athlete even if you're in a larger body. That doesn't negate your athleticism,
right?
Which I think is an important message, because use Nike as an example. Like, I don't look like any of the Nike models.
Yep.
Ever.
Yeah.
They look great, but that does not represent me whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we talk a lot about social rebellion. And I know you have all of these things that you're doing, that you've experienced, that you've gone through. What would you say would be your like primary social rebellion thing, something that from society that you are trying to fight against? Your number one.
Laws about our bodies. That's one thing. I've found myself to become quite placid, I suppose, when it comes to a lot of topics, because I just don't have the energy to argue, and I'm kind of in that point now where I'm like, I'm too old to be rocking the boat, and I can't be bothered. But and I still of course have the issue of people pleasing and wanting to be for everybody, but at the end of the day, you can't, if you're making everybody happy, you're doing something wrong. And that number one stance is pro-choice, right? And women having autonomy over their body. And I know that can be a sticky topic for a lot of people. And it's like, well, you have no effing right to tell another woman what she can and can't do with her body because it conflicts with your religious views. Because the reality is that God isn't going to come down and care for that child, you know, or nor is the state, nor is the government. You know, they just want to have control over us. And it's so archaic. It truly blows my mind. We are so bass backwards here in the United States on that topic. I mean, it just, any woman that gets an abortion, it's not like it's something that they really are comfortable with and want to do. You're right. So it's just, that would probably be my number one thing.
Just listening to you say it, like I had a hard time keeping from laughing out loud at how ridiculous it is. That's
right.
Like if you were to say to me, no, Kristen, you could not go off and do this thing because it's against what I believe. Like, how does that make sense? No, Kortney, I want to do this. Nope, you can't. I don't believe in it. Like, it doesn't make sense. And yeah, I was laughing internally at how ridiculous in the grand scheme of life that ultimately is.
Truly.
Especially, I'm not a Christian. I'm not a part of your book club. So like, does it still pertain to me? You know what I mean? It's and as a Canadian, you know, watching what's happening in the States, right? Like, we're not perfect. Like, there's the whole conversation about actual access to you know, to healthcare versus like the legalization or you know, what it's legal and what's accessible. But it seems like, yeah, it does seem like a step backwards in women's rights.
Yeah,
it should be.
It really truly is, you know. Everything is a case by case situation too. It's like, tell that to a woman who's just been raped by her uncle, that she has to see this pregnancy to full term. Like, you're having a laugh.
Yeah,
you're having an absolute fucking laugh. You know, and like when it comes to say, I was asked on a radio interview a couple days ago about how in 2019, you know, I had made a stand, made a statement rather, that, you know, I supported transgender athletes in sports. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And I shared the story. I think this was in a different newspaper article or something, where I had talked about how I had a grappling match with a transgender woman, and I didn't know she was transgender. We were matched very equally in terms of pound for pound, skill for skill. And you know, we went really hard, and neither one of us was able to submit the other person. And you know, I was very happy with the outcome. And then a couple hours later, I found out that she was transgender. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And I truly believe that beliefs control everything. You know, my favorite quote is Henry Ford saying, you know, whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're right. So had I gone into that knowing, and then had a belief that, you know, it was unfair, they would have an advantage, or whatever the case is, it would have been a different outcome. So I do believe that, you know, beliefs do control everything, and pave our experience as humans. So it's a really tricky thing, because, you know, for example, we have Janae Kroc, who has been a girl athlete, and she has world records in powerlifting, right? From previous times. And when she competes in jujitsu now, she competes in the men's division, right? There are MMA, women MMA fighters who have busted skulls of their opponents, who are, you know, they're transgender. So it's really a tricky topic, you know, and a case by case thing, and nobody's going to win. I mean, there will always be somebody that loses. Not everybody's going to win, you know? So it's just unfortunate that we you know, have got to figure this out. And that people are just wanting to chop each other off at the knees without listening to one another. So I think it's really a case by case situation. The same with, a woman's body. Like I said, a majority of women they're not excited about going through with it. I know I certainly wasn't. I've had 2 abortions and I was on birth control both times, and using extensively, and God knows what would have happened, had I had that child. That's just not, this is not something that I was even capable of doing myself. And I'm sorry, but people don't get clean and sober because they have kids, and in fact, it just makes their life more fucked up, the child. So yeah, but again, you take away the right, then there's just no conversation to be had. So I think people need to have autonomy. We need to take in outside things into consideration, and people need to work on listening to one another as opposed to focusing on needing to be right, So yeah.
What listening works.
Yeah.
It
It really does.
It's amazing.
People should try it.
Another thing we always talk about is creating good trouble. What does good trouble mean to you, and what are you doing to create good trouble in the world?
That's a really good question. Good trouble, I suppose, would be just defying the social norm and creating a new path, not just going along with whatever is trending or, what we're supposed to be doing, and instead doing what you want to do. And that might cause waves for other people. It might conflict with them because, again, their beliefs are that we're supposed to act a certain way, we're supposed to look a certain way, we're supposed to talk a certain way. And when you fall out of line with that, it can really push people's buttons. But if you're not doing what's true to yourself, then, you're not going to live a fulfilled life. You're going to feel like a trapped, caged animal. So I suppose it's really encouraging women to do what they want to do despite being told otherwise. So I guess that would be my answer. That's a great question, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We came up with it.
Great job.
So you just wrapped up Grrrl Live. I'd love to, as someone that's always wanted to go and hasn't yet gone.
Yep.
Can you tell us what Grrrl Live is all about?
Yeah, you bet. Is essentially trying to mimic Camp Confidence. So give all these women an opportunity to come together in person and share experiences. This year's theme was fear, face everything and rise. And we took the participants, through a bit of a journey. That first day was listening to some speakers to get people raw, and into their feelings, and to really reflect on trauma and the stuff that we've been through, whether it's, molestation and physical abuse to body dysmorphia, and somewhere in between. But regardless of what your trauma is, to, bring that up, hash it, start looking at it. And then we took them through some really intense breath work with this incredible, I would call him a shaman. And, I think that was from getting the feedback, that was probably the most profound part of the weekend, was women doing this breathwork journey. And then, again, getting everybody to look at that stuff and to process it, and then open up workshops. So, then they can feel empowered. So it's like creating the awareness, looking at the problems, going through the journey, processing the trauma, and then coming out the other side and partaking in empowering activities. So there was a variety of sports: arm wrestling, powerlifting, acro yoga, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, parkour. And then, of course, stuff for people who aren't able-bodied, unpacking privilege, crystal bowl sound meditation. And then we had pro wrestling as well, off-site in a ring, which was really cool. And give women the opportunity to leave on, and sexy chair dancing, but give women the opportunity to leave on a really high note. And then the next day we got into self-defense, again, so facing more trauma, preparing ourselves, and then doing some personal development activities, which are experiential, because, you can go and sit in a room and take notes, but it's so much better to like experience an activity, and that takes it from your head to your soul, if you will, not to sound like a dirty hippie, but by experiencing it, then becomes part of your programming. So you don't have to sit and like refer back to a set of notes. It's just there. And it's a part of, your subconscious, and it just pops up. And this one activity we did is called Tommy Boy, where, there's a scene in Tommy Boy. I don't know if you remember that movie with Chris Farley. Yeah. Where he lights this guy's car on fire, trying to sell him brake pads. And, the whole script itself is about a paragraph, and it takes about a minute to recite the whole thing. But when you put in all the little extra bits, talking about basically like a director's cut, like, okay, now you pick up the car and light it on fire, and David Spade rolls his eyes, and this guy does this. It comes out to about 3 pages. So when you hand people the script, it's really overwhelming, and you're like, what? I have 2 hours to memorize this? You've lost your mind. And we give them through lunch as well. So it's like, well, you have the option, because right, how often we procrastinate and put stuff off, or, make ourselves into the victim, when it's like, well, you had an extra hour during lunch. You have the choice. You have the power to decide how you want to best utilize your time. But the whole point of the activity is to teach women that repetition is the mother of all skill, right? And by over and over and over and practicing, you eventually get it. And that's how you build confidence. That's how you get good at something. So just the other day, I needed to memorize, not just the other day, this was months ago, feels like just the other day, but I needed to memorize 14 slides for a 4-minute pitch deck I'm an investor. And I thought, oh my God, there's no way. And then boom, all of a sudden I was like, oh yeah, hold on. Because I did this activity like 8 years ago at a network marketing conference of all places. And I said, oh, that's right. I've done this. I can do this, but someone just telling me, oh, you can sit down and memorize this. You just have to practice it. Okay. But once you do it, and you show yourself. So we had 2 finalists that tied, because, we'd have small groups of 8, and then 1 winner per group. And then that group goes up on stage and we pick a winner by ways of applause. But they seem to have tied. So they split. It was like $1,000 gift card plus a coaching session with me, and then a lot of other small little gifts and stuff. So they ended up splitting it. But yeah, that was pretty awesome. And then a few closing speakers, including my husband, who actually talked about his own personal experience of last year and attempting to take his own life, and talking about the importance of mental health, and, just sharing some tips with that. So, it was a really amazing way to end the weekend, because there's, all about women empowerment and women. And then our final speaker is a man, bringing this male energy, reiterating that we are bringing peace to the world, and, softening these hard shields on these men. And it was really quite amazing. So it was great. Just, wish we had more women there. We had a massive wave of COVID that came through. And in fact, I got the vid like a couple of weeks before the event. So I had fortunately tested negative the week of. So thank God. That would have been a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But we're already looking at dates for next year, and then of course how we rinse and repeat that and take it up to you in Canada, so you don't have to travel down here to Las Vegas, even though it is a great excuse for people to come and have a little holiday. So yeah. So
yeah, I don't know if there's that many of us girls on the West Coast, but the West Coast would be a great place to,
Right,
to
right.
have it. I'm sure the Toronto girls would be like, no.
I know. It's yeah, it's tricky to be like, oh, where do we go to next? But
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so before
Yeah.
we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to add or like to ask us, or anything we missed?
No, really. I mean, I just so appreciated your support when I was going through that really difficult time, and then of course went through it again, right? So after publishing my book, I my thyroid crapped the bed again and went through that whole period of um not sleeping. And I got back on the horse after about 3 months. And then last year in December, it was about January, I guess, of this year, I stopped sleeping again. And that went on for about 6 weeks. And just to know that you were there was super helpful. But again, I don't know if it was hormonal, if it was a stress response, if it was thyroid related, because I was getting all these tests and, inconclusive. It was just super weird, super weird. But, to get through that and come out the other side, and just so appreciate the support. And, because it's scary. But now, whenever I have little windows where I don't sleep, I'm like, okay, well, even if it's a month and a half, at least it'll pass. Because it's that feeling of thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to sleep again.
Yeah.
That's so debilitating. You're like, oh my God, this is I'm going to be crazy.
Yeah.
But just knowing that it will eventually pass and you will eventually start sleeping again, it's helped a lot. So
yeah, I think I've shared my whole story on this podcast, but that's how I got into wanting to coach women's health, because same thing, I suddenly stopped sleeping. It was very suddenly, and it was a struggle to find support. Like, my doctor wanted to put me on antidepressants. Like, that's not the problem. Like, I feel like shit now because I haven't slept in like 4 weeks, but and it really led me down to that, like researching hormones and understanding and educating myself so that I could help other women as much as I can. Because it's crazy. Like, one of the worst parts for me when I went through that insomnia was a feeling of isolation, and like, my family doctor didn't seem to give a shit. And none of my friends had dealt with it either. So they, as much as they could be as supportive as they could, they didn't quite actually understand what was happening, what I was going through. And I couldn't work, I couldn't train, I couldn't do anything. Like you said, you literally feel like you're going crazy. And I felt like the only time I ever actually got a really decent little sleep was when I like cried my eyes out for about 5 hours and then was exhausted and would fall into like sleep for a couple of hours. But you're right, to come out of it. And there's still times when, like, even last night, I remember having the thought as I turned out my lamp to go to bed, I thought, how am I going to fall asleep? Like, how does this work? Because you want to outthink the sleep, and you can't. Like, okay, go. But that's not how it works, and it still creeps out from time to time, just in my those beliefs of like, oh, I'm not going to be able to fall asleep. And this is like, what, 3 years later. But yeah, appreciate you, and anytime you're not sleeping, know that at least someone understands. Understands
100%.
that shit.
Appreciate that. But yeah, no, it's been a great chat. I appreciate the opportunity to there you go. So your internet connection is unstable, so that was really good timing.
Good timing.
Wait till the end.
Yeah, awesome. It's been so great to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and I'll let you know when we get this date picked in the next couple of weeks, so you can start planning to come down next year.
Awesome.
Far out. All right, girls, we have a great one, and we'll talk to you soon.
You too.
Thanks.